Hello, merhaba, salam alaikum, and also Ramadan Mubarak. Konnichiwa. Welcome to the second episode of Radio Borderlanders Japan, the radio show for all those living in Japan who are interested in issues relating to immigration and border control affecting both foreign citizens and Japanese nationals alike. The program is broadcast on the internet via YouTube and distributed to those in immigration detention in Japan via CD recording. The song that you're hearing is called Gureycan by Turkish politically left-wing folk group Yorum. This band produces songs of left-wing political content and also was the first band in Turkey to release songs in the Kurdish language during the 1980s, when the use of the language was officially banned in Turkey. However, since 2016, the activities of the band had been severely restricted. Some members of the band had sought asylum abroad, while others were imprisoned within Turkey. 2 members of the band had been in jail but had been subsequently released because of failing health brought on by a hunger strike, and have subsequently passed away in the last month. Helen Bullock, 28, who can be heard singing this song, died on April 3rd after 288 days of her hunger strike, while Ibrahim Gokcek, 41, died on the 7th of May after a 323-day hunger strike. The song Gureycan apparently means beautiful flower in the Zaza dialect of the Kurdish language. Welcome again to Borderlanders Japan. Radio Borderlanders Japan is for all those interested in issues to do with border control. We believe that the strict controlling and policing of borders and the tight restrictions on the movement of people, including those of refugees and undocumented migrants, does more harm than good and only leads to division. This program is for all of us living with the border as a presence that shapes and restricts our lives and relationships with others. We are Borderlanders, those who live with, on, or next to the border. We encounter those who are restricted and excluded by the border. Some of us are those excluded and restricted by the borders. Our aim is to raise awareness of issues to do with immigration and border control in Japan for the purpose of finding better ways for allowing free movement of people and constructive interaction with others. Welcome once again to Borderlanders Japan. In this episode, originally released on May the 2nd, we will cover issues to do with the issue of appearing at immigration to renew provisional release forms, or in Japanese karihomen no shutto, as immigration makes it unnecessary for people to go to immigration to renew their permission forms for the foreseeable future. News regarding a demonstration held on the 25th of April 2020 outside Tokyo Immigration Bureau's detention center. News on the demonstration by women refusing to re-enter their rooms in protest of their long-term and ongoing detention during the corona pandemic, while others are being released. Also, many people continue to be released from detention as the government of Japan makes public new guidelines calling for the generous use of provisional release, karihomen, but at the same time is not releasing all those in detention. We also cover statements made by international bodies such as the UNHCR and UNICEF calling for the release of all those in detention, as well as examples of people being released overseas. Finally, we will be looking at various statements made by civil society organizations in Japan regarding the release of those in immigration detention facilities. So let's get into the headlines. First, we look at the response by the Immigration Bureau to the coronavirus for those on provisional release. In a tweet from the Twitter account of the Tokyo Regional Immigration Bureau in Shinagawa, posted on the 15th of April, states that there is no need for those on provisional release, karihomen, to go in person to the Immigration Bureau in Shinagawa to review their provisional release permission forms for the foreseeable future. This information has also been conveyed by telephone calls to individuals on provisional release. Regarding this phone call and the letter from the Immigration Bureau, Ms. Shu from the Society for Supporting Kurdish Refugee M has posted a blog post. The blog post reads, "Having spoken to Refugee M on the phone, M told me that they had received a letter from immigration on 30th of April. Inside was a request for appearance, telling M of their next date for processing their provisional release, karihomen. Following the emergency declaration by the government on 7th of April, in order to mitigate against the 3 Cs, or sammitsu, at the Immigration Bureau, By the way, the 3 C's are closed spaces, crowded places, and close contact settings. The letter stated those on provisional release, or karihomen would be exempt from the requirement to appear at the Immigration Bureau for the foreseeable future. On the 9th of April, M had received a phone call from Immigration informing them of these details and informing them of their next date of appearance. According to the request for appearance they received, the next date for them to appear at Immigration is the 17th of June, Wednesday, at 10 a.m., Tokyo Immigration Bureau 2nd Deportation Department. The request for appearance came together with a long letter written in easy Japanese, including a sentence in English, so I'll read the first sentence that is also given in English and provide my own translation for the rest. Firstly, it states, we changed the date you need to appear for provisional release because of coronavirus disease 2019, COVID-19. Then in Japanese it states, the date written on the request for appearance included is your new provisional release appearance date, karihomen shutobi. If there is anything you do not understand, please call Immigration. Tokyo Immigration Services Bureau, Violation Determination Department, Provisional Release. The number is 0570-034-259, extension 000-4-8. Regarding the phone number, you can check it from this video and from the blog for which I've provided the link below. So, it is now the case that those on provisional release do not have to make an appearance for renewing their provisional release permission forms. I personally spoke to a person I know who is a Kurdish refugee from Turkey, and they mentioned that this notice had arrived to people who they know, but that it had not yet arrived at his own house. Also, Elizabeth from Karihomen no Kai mentioned to me that she had not received the letter from Immigration and had been worried about this, so she went to Immigration to renew her permission paper. Next, we look at something of concern to both those in immigration detention and their families, as well as those supporting them. As of the 27th of April, there will be no visitations allowed for those detained in immigration detention facilities in Japan. The notice was posted on the Twitter account for the Tokyo Immigration Bureau in Shinagawa. The restriction is the same for all detention centers in Japan. The announcement from Twitter reads as follows. In consideration of the issuing of the emergency declaration in order to prevent infection from the new coronavirus, the Tokyo Regional Immigration Services Bureau from the 27th of April will not be allowing visits between detainees and visitors, other than those from the consulate and lawyers, for the foreseeable future. We ask for your understanding and cooperation. In addition, there was a tweet immediately following the previous one that reads, regarding the issue of visiting detainees mentioned in the previous tweet, as a substitute for visits which are not allowed, the opportunity to talk with detainees over the phone will be made available. There are limits to the time and number of calls that can be made. Those who wish to do so should call the Tokyo Regional Immigration Services Bureau on 090-1883-0575. End of tweet. It should be noted that this number is specific to each Regional Immigration Services Bureau's detention center, so please check with the relevant bureau. Now, there have probably been some people who have already gone to visit friends, family members, or acquaintances not knowing about these new measures. Please tell people you know about this information so that they do not make the long journey to detention centers in places such as Shinagawa, Ushiku in Ibaraki, or Omura in Nagasaki Prefecture. In regard to the option for calling detainees by phone, this is something new for Japanese detention centers, as previously it has been impossible even for lawyers to call detainees from outside a detention center. So in some ways, this can be seen as a positive measure. There is some information, however, from a tweet by SYI, Immigration Detainees Friends, which is the group of Miss Asahi Oda, who many people in detention know. According to this tweet, one of the members of the group made a call before 4 p.m. to Ushiku Detention Center, as applications for visits are usually accepted up until 4 p.m. But they were told that phone calls were only accepted till 3 p.m. Apparently, all detention centers across the country now accept calls from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. and from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. They were told that the phone call is for 10 minutes per call. Also, although those making calls can request as many as they like, each detainee is restricted to receiving 2 calls per week, which is not very many. Also, apparently there is a member of staff watching them during calls, and that if detainees try to give the phone to someone else during a call, the call will be ended immediately. So it is possible to make calls, but under restricted circumstances. In regard to this issue, it has already been mentioned by lawyers such as Mr. Koichi Kodama that these kinds of issues regarding the communication between detainees and lawyers, as well as friends and family, could be easily solved by allowing detainees to have their own mobile phones inside the detention centers, as is the case in many countries such as Australia or the United Kingdom. Next, we look at the demonstration held in front of Tokyo Immigration Bureau in Shinagawa on the 25th of April, demanding the release of those in immigration detention. This demonstration was featured in the left-wing newspaper Zenshin, so let us briefly look at this article. The article states that on the 25th of April, a demonstration to encircle Tokyo Regional Immigration Bureau called for by the National Executive Committee for Defeating the Alien Registration Law, Immigration Law, and Ethnic Racial Discrimination was fought with 150 participants. I also participated in this demonstration. It was a windy day and everyone was wearing masks, so I think infection from the coronavirus was alleviated to a degree at least. One of the police officers was quite friendly and was joking that they couldn't blow their whistle while wearing a mask. The interaction with police was fairly mild and sometimes friendly. After the demonstration, I spoke to Miss Kimiko Tanaka, who is the representative for Ushiku-no-kai and who was one of the organizers of the rally. Regarding the long-term detention of those seeking refugee status in Japan, Ms. Tanaka stated that as refugees tend to be people who have taken a stand against governments in their own country, she thought that fundamentally the Japanese government does not want to accept such people, and that this was at the root of the problem. I also asked her about the proposed solution to the problem of so-called those evading deportation, or sokankisha, as described by the Ministry of Justice. Justice Minister Mori had stated in Parliament in answer to a question on this issue that the solution to those foreigners in long-term detention and for those evading deportation was for them to be returned to their own country as soon as possible. Ms. Tanaka stated that this was utter nonsense, complete and utter nonsense, that it is not that they won't go back, but that they can't go back, that many of these people are seeking asylum in Japan and cannot go back to their own country. She also spoke of Japan's abysmally low rate for accepting refugees and the fact that only 40 people were granted refugee status last year out of around 10,000 applications for recognition as refugees. She stated that in such a situation, the government needs to consider why people are refusing to be deported. Next, we will look at the demonstration by women inside Tokyo Regional Immigration Bureau's detention center that occurred on the 25th of April on the same day as the demonstration. According to various sources, including the husband of one of the women who was involved in the protest, women in detention at Shinagawa had gathered in the corridor area between the rooms at around 4:30 p.m. and had requested an explanation regarding why they were not being released on provisional release. The women thought it unfair that others who had only been detained for a short time but who had agreed to return to their own countries had been released, even without applying for provisional release, while many of the women protesting had outstanding applications for provisional release and many had been detained for months and in some cases for years. There were around 14 women who had written signs in English which they held up to their chest which read, "Give us freedom and free us please." However, the time to return to their rooms had passed and immigration guards told the women to return to their rooms. But the women had stated that they wanted an explanation from higher up regarding why they were not being released. Instead of listening to the women's peaceful requests, the staff called for reinforcements and around 50 guards came into the area. Around 15 guards took on each individual and forcibly removed them from the hallways into any nearby room, not necessarily their own. The women were then sent to single-cell monitoring rooms and then separated from each other into different cells to which they had been staying before. Since I reported on this in the Japanese version of this show, there have been more investigations regarding this issue, more demonstrations outside the center at meetings at the parliament with questions directed at immigration bureaucrats. All this will be covered in the next show. Next, we will look at the increasing number of those coming out of detention as the Immigration Agency releases guidelines for letting out those in detention on provisional release, karihomen, as a response to the coronavirus. Firstly, there was an article published by the Sankei Shimbun titled Proactive Use of Provisional Release for Detainees, Response to the New Type Coronavirus by Immigration. The article states, on the 1st of May, the Ministry of Justice released a manual outlining ways to work towards preventing the spread of the coronavirus at regional immigration bureaus around the country. It recommends proactively using provisional release, karihomen, to free those physically confined in detention, and temporarily separating new arrivals in the detention center for a monitoring period. The guidelines were sent to immigration facilities throughout the country. The article also states that, according to the Immigration Services Agency, that by the 30th of April, there were 910 individuals being detained in 17 facilities around the country. Up until now, there have been no confirmed cases of infection to the coronavirus among members of staff or detainees. So that was the latest from the Immigration Services Agency at the time, and we will see how the new manual is implemented. However, it remains the case that there are still those in long-term detention who have not been granted provisional release status, and this is a problem. Regarding those still in detention, there was an article published in the Tokyo Shimbun on 27th of April that discusses a request from detainees that was sent to immigration authorities asking that more measures be taken to separate detainees and prevent the risk of infection to the coronavirus. According to the article, the content of the request is as follows. We have something to tell you regarding the new coronavirus. In order to prevent the spread of the coronavirus among those detained inside immigration and to reduce the spread of infection, we ask that each person is given a room to themselves. As has already been decided by the Japanese government, please stop placing people together. That was a translation of the statement by the detainees. According to the article, 28 individuals lent their names in support of the petition, all of them men from 17 countries including Nepal, Pakistan and the Philippines. Most of them are in rooms where 2 or 3 inmates live together. According to Ms. Tsuru, a member of Ushiku no Kai who has visited many people in detention at the center in Ushiku City in Ibaraki, who was interviewed for the article, stated, "The detainees are like birds in a cage. They have no way to protect their own lives." She also stated that she took this message very seriously. In this article, it was stated that 30 individuals have been granted provisional release, karihomen, and released from detention. Among those released are those who I also know personally. One such person mentioned in the article is a man who has a Japanese wife. She has also been interviewed for the article and mentioned how worried she has been about the possibility of her husband being infected with the virus. Also a man from Sri Lanka who had been detained in Srinagar for over a year and a half before being moved to Ushiku has now been released as well. Since that article, many more people have been released from detention. Even back near the end of April, Ms. Tanaka Kimiko and also Ms. Tsuru from Ushiku no Kai mentioned that more than 50 people had been released at that time. According to Ms. Tanaka, the latest numbers are now closer to 90 individuals that have been released. Another individual released is Mr. Mehmet Ojagiru, who had been in detention for close to 2 years and who has a wife and 3 children, including a daughter who has a learning disability brought on by a head injury inflicted by Turkish forces in a raid on the family home when she was very young. There was a petition calling for his release organized by the Society for Understanding Kurds in Japan, which many people listening to this program had also signed. The many people signing this petition, the efforts by lawyers, the many visits to the General Affairs section of Immigration by Mr. Hideki Matsuzawa, all these things contributed to pressuring immigration to release Mr. Ozjagir from detention. Mr. Ozjagir had said to me when I visited him that As the coronavirus spreads, it was wrong that he and all the others in detention were not being freed. He also mentioned that immigration staff said to him that the reason your detention is long is because you refuse to go back to your country. This is an inexcusable thing to say to someone seeking asylum who is clearly saying that they cannot return to their country. In this time, where many people are being released, it needs to be remembered that not everyone is being let out of detention. There are reports of people also being moved between detention facilities. According to Ms. Tsuru from Ushikunokai, there are an unknown number of individuals being moved to the detention center in Ushiku, most likely from Shinagawa. As a measure to prevent the spread of coronavirus, the new arrivals are being separated from those already in detention at the center. According to sources inside the detention center in Ushiku, those suspected of having a fever are moved to Block 6B, while those newly arriving to the center are being placed in 6A. Also, apparently those who have said that they will leave once the planes are flying again to their country are being granted provisional release. At the same time, there are still those who have been detained for a long time who are not being let out. At a time where there is a risk that the coronavirus could spread inside the detention facilities, it is hard to understand what the purpose is to moving detainees between facilities, especially at a time where other countries are in a state of lockdown and planes are not flying and visitors from Japan are being denied entry to countries around the world. There is absolutely no reason to keep people in detention facilities, which are intended for the preparation before returning to their country of origin. It is good that many people are being released. However, once outside, those on provisional release, or karihomen, cannot work and are basically undocumented migrants without the right to reside in the country. Unless they are granted refugee status or special permission to stay by the government, this situation will just continue, and they will likely be detained again. We turn now to look at some responses to the coronavirus at immigration detention centers from around the world. According to a statement by the United Nations Network on Migration titled COVID-19 and Immigration Detention, what can governments and other stakeholders do? They have 4 main recommendations directed at governments around the world that are as follows. 1. Stop new detentions of migrants for migration or health-related reasons and introduce a moratorium on the use of immigration detention. 2. Scale up and urgently implement non-custodial, community-based alternatives to immigration detention in accordance with international law. 3. Release all migrants detained into non-custodial, community-based alternatives following proper safeguards. 4. Improve conditions in places of immigration detention while alternatives are being scaled up and implemented. Also, in an article from Euronews from 29th April 2020 titled, Countries are suspending immigration detention due to coronavirus. Let's keep it that way. The article argues that one of the forward-thinking elements of Spain's response to COVID-19 was the decision to empty immigration detention centers. According to the article, Spain emptied all centers and only 3 individuals remained in detention on the mainland. Of course, there are still those in detention in the Spanish North African enclaves of Ceuta and Melilla, which is a massive problem. However, the article also mentions that despite these positive moves by Spain and other countries in Europe, countries such as Greece and Italy, who have the highest number of asylum seekers in detention, are not releasing detainees. And in the article, the situation in Greece was described as a time bomb. The article argues that this crisis and the response by Spain and other countries calls into question the very legitimacy of detaining those in immigration detention in the first place, and the need for alternatives to detention to be considered. As has been mentioned by many scholars and also by various international bodies, the detention of immigrants is a problem in itself and is a human rights violation, and that the long-term detention of immigrants is akin to torture and should be avoided. Finally, today we look at various petitions and statements that are being made by civil society organizations in Japan calling for the release of detainees and for support for those on provisional release, karihomen. In a state by Human Rights Now, and in a joint statement by 5 organizations, which are the Catholic Commission of Japan for Migrants, Refugees and People on the Move, the Japan Lawyers Network for Refugees, the Immigration Review Task Force, the Lawyers Society Fighting the Policy of Detaining All Cases, and the Solidarity Network with Migrants Japan, as well as in a statement released by PRAJ, or Provisional Release Association in Japan, also known as karihomen sha no kai. All three of these statements call for the speedy release of those in immigration detention by the government. The statement by karihomen sha no kai and by the five organizations calls for the granting of the right to reside legally in Japan and that visas be granted to those on provisional release. The statements by Human Rights Now and by the five organizations call for appropriate medical treatment to be provided to those both in detention and who are on provisional release. Lastly, I would like to mention a statement and petition released originally by the Society for Understanding Kurds in Japan, which has now been signed by 20 civil society organizations in Japan, including the Stateless Network, of which I am a member of the organizing committee. This is titled, Regarding the Emergency Economic Response to the New Coronavirus Infection. Please make it available to every person living in Japan. Briefly, the payment of 100,000 yen to families and individuals in Japan has been extended to foreign residents with visas, allowing them to reside in the country. The petition calls for this to also include foreign residents without documentation, allowing them to reside in the country, such as undocumented migrants and those on provisional release. If those who are listening to this program agree to this statement, there is a link to change.org below this video which you can sign. This concludes the second program for Radio Borderlanders Japan and our news headlines and digest. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope to join you next time on our next episode. Goodbye.